Hello, American Literature 2. We are moving right along. We're in week 4, and I hope you enjoyed our readings from last week. Our reading, I guess, just one reading from last week. This week we have 2 readings. So that's maybe where my mind was. This week we're also moving into a new school of philosophy that I want to tell you a little bit about so that you can better understand Stephen Crane. And this is we're working through a time of history where psychology is sort of it's a developing field of study. We're applying the scientific method to the mind, and it's becoming something that we are becoming more aware of as a society. So we're also reading Charlotte Perkins' The Yellow Wallpaper. But Stephen Crane is an author that we really think of as a naturalist. So the naturalist school of philosophy, of course, this is something that also is very dominant in the world today. Naturalism is a way of looking at the world that essentially says, okay, the physical world that we see and experience as human beings that's all there is. There is no spiritual world. There is no God or anything like a God. There's no such thing as karma. There's no such thing as, basically, the only thing that is real is what we can experience with our senses and what we can experience in this plane of existence. Okay, so whereas one person might see a miracle happen, or maybe a baby falls from a tree. I don't know what the baby was doing up there, but but the baby falls from a tree and miraculously does not break a bone, is not injured or anything. Well, I even say the word miraculously, right? But a naturalist would look at that and say, well, that's just luck. That's just how it happened. There is a rational explanation for that. Now, speaking of rational, if you took American Literature 1, you might remember the school of thought that dominated the early Americas and was dominant during the time of their founding fathers, and that is the school of rationalism, or what we also call the Age of Enlightenment. Now, it was during this time that we first started to see maybe what you might consider to be the earliest, the origins of the school of naturalism. And I don't know if many people might claim that the two may not necessarily have anything to do with each other, but I think it's clear that you can link the two, because during the Age of Enlightenment and during the time when rationalism was very much in vogue in literature and in philosophy, especially with the founding fathers, the founding of the United States and France in the French Revolution. There was a major shift in how you determine what is true. How do you know what is true? And this is a question that it still dominates the world that we live in now. How do you know what is true? And so for the vast majority of human history, what is true was determined by usually a religious leader, your priest, your pastor, maybe a religious book. In the West, of course, we would refer probably to the Bible. And so maybe you might go to the church. The Catholic Church was for much of Europe the source of the greatest truth, the fullness of the truth, if you will. And so what we saw in the Age of Enlightenment and during the Age of Rationalism, especially early on in the history of America, we saw a divorcing of that. We saw that the source of truth was now rational thought. And it wasn't that we completely divorced ourselves from religion and spirituality, but we definitely decided that if, yes, those things are there, you can have those beliefs, maybe they're true, but the ultimate source of truth is what we can prove with rational thought, with reason, and with the early days of the scientific method. Okay, so while we didn't completely divorce ourselves from belief in God with those early days, it was certainly a shift of where does the ultimate source of truth come from? is it from your religious point of view? Is it from the religious leaders or your tribal chieftain who saw a vision, or maybe the shaman of your tribe, which again dominated most of human history? Now we see, okay, truth is something that we can find through reasoning, through rational thought, through dialogue, and this, of course, is why freedom of speech was so important to the early founding fathers, because you had to be able to speak, and you had to be able to really to risk being offensive, and risk being different, being a contrarian. You had to have those freedoms in order to come to the ultimate truth, which is where that the essence of truth came from, especially with Age of Enlightenment thinking, which is, okay, we have to come to it through thought, through dialectic. And so that was the Age of Enlightenment. That was rationalism. Now we have moved a little bit more forward, a couple, maybe let's see, a little bit more than 100, maybe around 100 years. And we see the school of naturalism. And naturalism is very prevalent today. Naturalism says that there is no such thing as a God. There is no such thing as anything close to a God. And so we've completely divorced ourselves from that spiritual realm. Whereas you might have, in the Age of Enlightenment, it might be, okay, you go to church, but you know that real truth comes from science, comes from reason, comes from rationalization. Naturalism says, forget about anything other than science and your human experience. What you experience with your senses, that is where ultimate truth is. And truth is that the universe is a cruel place, and that there is no real sense of justice in the most spiritual sense, right? It's not like there's no such thing as karma. While we understand that karma is something that you don't necessarily find in like the Abrahamic religions, you do get punished, right? But in most religions, you get punished for doing bad, you get rewarded for doing good. Naturalism says, nope, that's not even a thing. If you do good, you might still die a terrible death and have no justice come to you. If you do evil, it's possible that you'll have that happen, but you might also win the lottery. There's no connection, right? There is just simple luck. And so now we're seeing this in Stephen Crane. Now, Stephen Crane wrote the book that you may be familiar with. He wrote the novel A Red Badge of Courage, the Red Badge of Courage, which is about the Civil War. He didn't fight in the Civil War, but actually it was written so well, and he did a lot of interviews with people who were in the Civil War. It's written so well that it was widely discussed amongst veterans of the Civil War. They were like, well, he must have fought at this battle, or they actually were like, there was a lot of discussion as far as which side this particular author was on, or and so he wrote it in a way that even veterans were like, wow, he really nailed it. And so with that being said, of course, in the time of war, there's an old saying that there are no such thing as atheists in a foxhole, and that goes back to you want to believe that God is going to protect you, or that your angels are going to protect you, or so that there's some kind of a reason behind all of this existence. And the naturalist would say, no, it's just we happen to be here. We live, we die. There's no real purpose. And that's pretty much it. So as you go about your reading with Stephen Crane, remember this, okay? And we'll take a quick look at the syllabus. Stephen Crane, we're reading The Open Boat. Now, you might read this and, without a basic understanding of what I just discussed, with regards to naturalism, you might read this and say, okay, there's this story. I'm not going to give you any, I'm not going to give away the story, but you might just read this and say, okay, this was a story about people who were in the shipwreck type situation. And what's the meaning behind this? What's the purpose behind this? What's the moral of the story? And I want you to really think about that. Whenever you see the characters, okay, because he's going to describe the characters, they're in this boat, they're trying desperately to survive this situation. And I want you to think about how this plays out in the mind of a naturalist, in the mind of a person who says there is no reason why uh, anything happens other than just a purely naturalistic point of view, right? And there's no karma, there's nothing, there's that it's not like the forces of good are going to save you or make things okay for you or bring you justice. So read this knowing full well that that is the school of thought that dominates Stephen Crane. And I want you to read the introduction to Stephen Crane in the book. So get a good idea of who he was, some of his other works. But this is a story that really, it's a great illustration of the worldview of a naturalist. So make sure to take a look at that. Now, in addition to that, we're reading Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And again, this is a time when the scientific method is starting to be applied to everything. Of course, we see in rationalism that it's being applied basically to the concept of truth. That really, other than just the hard facts, things that we can actually physically test. And there's nothing beyond the spiritual. It's only things that, like, and this is again coming down to the scientific method. If it cannot be tested, if it cannot be measured, does it really exist? And so that kind of a concept is being applied to everything, and it's also being applied to psychology. The field of psychology, of course, right now it's pretty well established. Of course, the funny thing is, even today, the field of psychology is not necessarily considered by many scientists as a true science. I don't know if you know that, but there's a lot of the scientists, like the physicists and the biologists and things like that. They look at, some of them, not all of them, but many of them look at psychology as kind of a soft science, as something that is not really something that can be completely done with science. And that is because much of it is done with your own personal interpretation of events, feelings, and emotions. And we know that those things are colored by our emotions and by our own personal point of view. And so it's very difficult to measure and to really objectively look at how the human psychology works. Now, we are getting much better at it these days, of course, with fMRI, with all of the studies that we can do now that we couldn't do back in early times of psychology, like the days of Sigmund Freud and some of those earlier psychologists, the fathers of psychology. But, we do still lack. Even in the year 2021, we still are relying mostly, when it comes to psychology, on what we might say are qualitative tests, where you might be asked a series of questions. How do you feel about this? How did this make you feel? And they have to kind of discern, okay, what is the condition of this person, as opposed to being able to do actual, physical hard tests. What is, because we can tell, what the half-life of an atom or a molecule or whatever is. We can do carbon dating and things like that. It's very difficult whenever we apply the scientific method to a human being. However, in the early days of psychology, and this is what we're going to be reading when it comes to Charlotte Perkins Gilman, in the early days of psychology, we started to understand that a lot of the things that we thought about psychology, a lot of the things that we attributed to the human experience, were just really silly. And they were oftentimes not loving. And they oftentimes were not coming from a place of care so much as they were coming from a place of, I don't really want to deal with your problems. And I wish you would just, I wish I could just kind of sequester you away, and maybe you'll heal yourself, and maybe you just need rest. Right. And so you're going to see that in this particular story. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think, okay, these are the early days of psychology. This isn't the modern day. This isn't, the term bipolar, or, a lot of these terms didn't exist back then. They didn't have antidepressants. They didn't have a lot of the things that we have now, and they didn't understand the world or the human psychology in the same way we did. However, with Charlotte Perkins Gilman, they were starting to understand some things. They were starting to, right? And so I want you to try to think about, okay, what is actually happening here? What is actually happening? Can I trust the narrator's voice? Can I trust the mind of the protagonist? Can I divine as to what is actually happening and what is not actually happening? So this is one of those stories where you have to, as a reader, you have to be a little bit suspect. You have to look at this and say, it could be that people's minds are playing tricks on them. It could be that the narrator is affected by some of this stuff. It could be that you're not getting the full story. So I want you to really, as you read it with the mind of a detective. Read it with maybe the understanding that you already have of psychology. Perhaps you've taken a course in psychology. What do you think? And we can kind of play psychologist a little bit with this particular story. What do you think is actually troubling the protagonist? How would you judge the treatment that this protagonist is getting? So take a look at the characters, and as you do your explications this week, okay? So I only ask, let's see, I think I only asked, let's take a look together. I'm pretty sure I only ask you to explicate one of the two readings. Let's take a quick look. So explicate one of the two readings by the end of this week. So you really only have to, okay, I want you to read them both. You need to read them both. Especially if you're an English major, you should be very, very, very familiar with these two short stories, but you only have to explicate one of the two. So when you're explicating, I want you to do the first paragraph is a summary of what happened, basically summarize the story. The second paragraph, I want you to really make a theory, okay? This is not going to be just, hey, this is what it meant to me. This is going to be, this is what it means. This is the meaning that maybe the author was trying to intend. And it's very difficult to determine authorial intent, the intent of the author. What did the author really mean? But I want you to try to say, I think the author is trying to say this about society, about reality, about psychology, about the way we treat each other, about the nature of truth, okay? I want you to get deep. I want you to think about this stuff, okay? And so I can't wait to read what you think about really both of these. I would love to assign you to explicate both of them, but I'm going to be the nice teacher and you only have to do one. Now, having said that, I want you to comment in the discussion boards this week, right? So this is week 4 discussions. And hey, maybe you're going to comment on both. I would love to get a good discussion going. And really, okay, what do you think? And this can come down in the discussion boards. You can really talk about, okay, when it comes to the nature of truth, how do you determine truth? And how is that different from the naturalistic point of view? How is that different whenever you're determining why is this all happening? What is the purpose for all of this? Is it somewhere more like the age of enlightenment where you still retain some of your religious belief, but you also say, but at the end of the day, the only thing I can prove is this. So that's the only thing I really know I can trust. Or maybe you're on the other side of that and you say, hey, I know that I know my religious truth is absolute. And then this other stuff is subject to interpretation. Possibly you're like a naturalist and you might say, there is no God. There's nothing like a God. There is no spiritual side. The only thing that I know for sure, and the only thing that I can even trust is my own experience. And really, there's no such thing as karma. Everything is just a matter of happenstance, sort of just, good luck or bad luck. And there's no real driving force behind it other than it just is. So, get into it. Have a nice discussion. Remember, the beauty of literature, the beauty of the humanities is that you can speak. I mean, obviously we want to be nice. We don't want to get any, fights or anything. This is not social media, but we can speak our mind and we can kind of toy with ideas. So have an open mind, have a nice discussion. I mean, you don't have to, I'm not asking you to change your worldview or anything like that. I'm just saying, how can you apply some of this type of thinking, or maybe there's a hole in this type of thinking. Now, I'll tell you this, Naturalism is still alive and well. So is rationalism. So is the Age of Enlightenment. So is everything. All of these schools of thought, none of them go away. We just add to the conversation over time. And believe me, we're not done adding. We've got a lot of other schools of thought that are coming up that are just as interesting and just as in depth as far as how they might affect your point of view and how they affected the author's worldview who espoused them. So take a look at the readings. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be in my office, my virtual office, all day on Monday. Usually I'm in my virtual office till about 3 p.m. I do take a few breaks here and there. If you want to make sure to have a discussion with me, if you want to make sure to be in so that we can actually talk, make sure, go ahead and make an appointment with me. But generally Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. I am in my office. And then Monday or on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's usually 2 o'clock, the 1 o'clock hour or the 2 o'clock hour. It can vary on those days. I do try to do one of those 2 hours on Tuesdays, but please just get a hold of me. Let me know. If you want to drop in and just try it out, that's fine. But it's always best to just confirm, hey, I want to talk to you. That way, you're not, preparing for something and then I just happen not to be there. Or maybe I've already made an appointment with someone else and I'm talking to them for that hour or part of that hour. It's always best to seek me out and to schedule a time to talk. So guys, I hope you enjoy these readings. They really are, they're more fun, I think, when you know the schools of thought behind them and when you're trying to divine meaning from these and trying to figure out, okay, and really try to explicate those things. So look at them, enjoy them, and I can't wait to read what you write. Guys, have a great week, and I will check in with you next week.